You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where I, Raina Wilson, your host, will bring together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and insight. So many times life becomes messy and overwhelming to sift through all the data, research, and influencer must-haves in order to really be the healthiest version of you. If you're looking to learn, grow, and listen to other people's stories in their own wellness journey, then keep listening, because there might just be some wisdom for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have a sweet friend of mine joining me, Grace Boggs. Grace is currently pursuing her master's in child and adolescent counseling in the midst of doing full mama life with a toddler and newborn. So in this episode, she shares all about the juicy topics in parenting, from attachment theory to gentle parenting styles and what that looks like with a gospel perspective. So if you hear any newborn noises in the background, we had a sweet special guest with us for this episode, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. So let's dive in. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. And today I have an amazing friend, Grace Boggs, and she's just doing all the fun mama life right now. Grace, can you introduce yourself, share more about what every day looks like for you right now before we dive into any of the juicy conversation?
Yeah, like Raina said, I'm Grace. I am a mama to a crazy 2-year-old wild toddler, like all 2-year-olds are, and a beautiful 7-week-old baby boy. And right now, my day-to-day life looks like motherhood. What I think motherhood looks for a lot of mamas, which is juggling and balancing. What does it mean for me to mom these boys while being a person myself, while being a wife, while being a follower of Jesus, and all of those things that I get to be in life. So there's a lot of snacks and a lot of cooking and a lot of cleaning and all of those mundane tasks, but there's also a lot of precious moments of snuggles and reading books and new developments and all of those fun things that you get with a toddler. So yeah, one of the most precious things in this season has just been learning how to be a mom of two. We're still in that newborn phase, which sometimes I think gets a really bad rap of it's going to be hard and you're not going to sleep and all of this is going to be difficult. But this second time around has been really, really precious to me for a lot of reasons. And so that's been really fun and really cool as a mom to just feel gifted in this season by the Lord to say, hey, like, I'm going to make some of these things easy for you so that you can focus on your babies. And so that's been really fun.
That's so sweet. Can you share a little bit about what does like professionally, academically look like for you right now in the midst of caring for yourself?
So I always say my husband and I are really crazy and we did life really fast. And so sometimes what that means is that we're babies with babies and we didn't really know what we wanted to be when we grew up, but we knew we wanted to have babies. And so we're still in the ropes of figuring that out. So I started grad school when my firstborn was just 6 months old, and I'm pursuing my master's in counseling. And in that kind of rhythm of things means night school for me. And so I'm a mom during the day and go to school at night, currently taking a semester off for this newborn season, but we'll be back at it in the summer. So I don't work other than for school. So right now it's just grad school and focusing on that and the goals of graduating hopefully in the spring of 2024 with my master's in counseling.
Sweet. What are you studying in counseling specifically? Do you have a specialty?
So the way pursuing your LPC works is you kind of go broad and then professionally on your own after you graduate, you narrow. And so for me, I'll graduate with kind of the broad umbrella of LPC. And then the goal after that would be to specialize specifically for mamas and children. And so what we do in counseling is we kind of get to focus on what we call a model, which is just a theory of counseling. And so my current theory that I'm really passionate about is trauma-centered behavioral counseling. And so that just means that I would love to work with kiddos who've experienced some rough patches and walk them through that and get them on the other side.
Yeah, I can imagine there's so many kiddos that just need an a little bit of extra love, but I think parents also to be
Mm-hmm.
equipped in having those hard conversations or navigating those paths along with their little ones. So let's just dive in because I can imagine doing motherhood with a toddler and newborn in the midst of learning this stuff alongside, like you said, the mundane but really sweet moments of motherhood. What has been the biggest influence for you in learning academically what it looks like to parent while trying to like be a real life parent?
Yeah, I think one word, and you and I have talked about this before, but the word that stands out is attachment.
Okay.
And I remember my first semester of counseling school. So my son is 6 months old. And I remember my professor looking at us and saying, the most important years for your child's life psychologically are 0 to 5. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like so struck by that because you don't look back on your past if you haven't experienced childhood trauma. You don't look back on your past and say, oh, yeah, I really remember those 0 to 5 years being super
Right.
influential. You look back and you go, yeah, when I was 13, this happened. When I was 16, this happened. And so a lot of my life was spent thinking I would always serve teenagers and like that was going to be my area of ministry. But the Lord really refined that really quickly in counseling school and said, no, what you're doing as a mom is so crucial as ministry because those years are the years when your child forms what we call healthy attachment. And without that healthy attachment, they're never going to form another healthy relationship in their life, including with the Lord.
Mm.
And so
Wow.
that if that's not happening in the home, then it's going to have to be repaired in some really intentional ways later. And so that has been just like my goal in motherhood and my dream for our family is that someday my boys would look back and go, oh yeah, I didn't think about those years 0 to 5 because they
Right.
happened so naturally, organically, and beautifully that they're developing healthy relationships in their life.
Can you give, I guess, like a textbook or like layman definition of attachment theory? Because I'm thinking like
Mm-hmm.
extra snuggles for baby or, like don't yell at him as like
Mm-hmm.
I grew up.
Yeah. Yeah, and those aren't wrong. Just to preface that, those aren't wrong thoughts about what we term now as attachment parenting. But the kind of like a layman's term definition for attachment is literally the way that your child is going to respond when they look at you, hear your voice, or feel your touch. And so, how are they responding to those things? And those are the three biggies, right? Like eye contact is a display of attachment. That's the one of the first things your child will display. Even newborns, they'll look at you like
Mm-hmm.
with those big bug eyes
Yeah.
straight in your eyeballs, right? And so, eye contact. When we see kiddos that have poor attachment, they're not making eye contact with
Interesting.
anyone. That's a huge sign for us. Hey, there's something going on there with that kid. So that's one sign of attachment. Another is if we're avoiding physical contact, we don't have good attachment. And so, how are you as a parent modeling physical contact, maybe in your marriage or other relationships? And then, how are you giving them
Mm,
physical contact? That can go from one extreme to the other, and there are lots of
right.
opinions out there on what that looks
Sure.
like, as you and I both know as mamas
Yeah.
who hold our babies a lot. For me, as a mom and a counselor personally, I'm really passionate about co-sleeping and holding your baby as much as you can. Um, so that's just one way to do it. There are other ways to do it as well. And then the other way is the way you speak, right? So how are you speaking with your child? And that does look like not yelling. That does look like having a conversation instead of demanding and things like that. One of the biggest things we talk about in child and adolescent counseling with parents and how to talk to your kid is if your kid comes to you with a thought, remember that their ideas to them are the biggest thing in the world.
Right.
Even if that is, I want to go outside right now, right? 2-year-old, that's 90% of what I hear. I want to go outside. If it's that, the biggest thing they're looking for from you is yes, is affirmation. And so, how can we turn our no into a conversation?
Right.
We can't go outside right now, but this is what we can do. Things like that. So that instead of always hearing you shut them down, they're hearing something different. Because if they always hear you shut them down, someday they're either going to stop asking or they're going to rebel. Those are the two options really that we see in the counseling world. So yeah, those are the big three: eye contact, touch, and conversation.
And that's, I think I'm wrestling with like the conversation right now with a
Yeah, me
with
too.
a soon to be 2-year old, because man, I think it's just like we've talked about this. I think it's the Lord's gentle reminder with me of patience, pause, and gentleness. Because I wasn't raised in a home that was the first instinct. I think that, like I've shared on other episodes, like my parents did the
Yeah.
best that they could. And so trying to model that with my husband, alongside pausing to even explain to my
Mm.
son that he's eaten all of the grapes in the house and we have no more grapes. Like
That's so accurate.
I never would have thought like that would have been their whole world.
Yeah, yeah. Something that's been refining me lately is, when can you say yes, even when it's hard for you? And I think with two, that's been really, really hard, because I'm like, I want to say no a lot because I need rest. I need to nurse. I need all of these things, right? And they're not bad needs for me. Like, I do need those things. But what would it take to just say yes a few more times in the day? What would, like earlier,
Right.
he wanted to play with ice cubes. So what about just saying yes to the mess and the heart of that, even when it's hard and yucky, just doing it because you can. And so sometimes there is a good yes you can give to your child. There are things now that people do with older children, like yes days, which are really special and wonderful, where you literally, you'll say yes to everything they ask in that day. Yeah, parents set parameters, which are usually really age-based parameters, right? Like if you have a 4-year-old, there's going to be some things they can't do that they're going to ask to do.
Right. Let me drive. That's our biggest thing right now. My son wants to drive the car.
Right. Oh, me too. Yes, yes. And love sticking the keys in all the wrong places. But yes.
But that's so interesting.
Yeah. So yes days are a really great way for them to know, like, you're for them. You want them to have fun. You want them to be happy. You want them to enjoy their life and their surroundings. It's not all about rules all the time.
What a sweet reminder of biblical boundaries. Like, the Lord doesn't give us boundaries because he's a fun or a joy killer.
Exactly.
He wants it for our protection and our goodness, but there's so many times we fight him on that.
But a child's language of love is play. So just remembering that, like, how are they going to perceive you as a mom and a dad? And it's going to be how you play with them.
What has that yes been like for you, specifically in your transition to 2? Is it you saying yes to more things with your toddler? Is it you saying yes to more things for you or for your, like, how do you balance that yes in the midst of a newborn season and just motherhood in general?
Great question. Yeah, I think it's like, so for those of you listening that don't know this week, Raina and I both experienced a lockdown of snow and ice in Fort Worth, Texas. And so yesterday, our day started really rough. And I think my husband and I both woke up with this perception that it's going to be a bad day because we can't go anywhere and we're stuck. And that perception really shaped our day and our toddler's day right off the bat. And I remember sitting down to get ready to try to help nap him. And I was sitting there and I was going, man, we have said no to him like all day long. Like, I just processed that for myself of, why has it been such a hard day? And I realized it's because we're fighting. Like, it feels like a fight all day long. So I helped get my husband, like, helped him get to sleep, and he napped and he woke up, and I was ready and rolling with ideas of what we could do for the rest of the day that would be fun and easy. And he helped me cook. We washed dishes together. We took a bath with, those little paint color tabs. Used so many, we turned the water black. So that was really fun. Yeah. So just different things that I could do. And so I think for me, yesterday it was saying yes to my toddler. Today, it's saying yes to myself and getting to do this interview with you. And so I think that every single day that really looks super different. Some days my newborn is just going to need me more. He has a tummy ache. He's struggling to fall asleep. different things like that. Like, and I'm just not going to have a choice in where my yes goes, because it's going to go to the 7-week-old baby, right? Like, he's dependent on me in that way. And so a lot of things shift depending on who needs mama more. But other days it doesn't. And I get to just relax a little bit and be with myself. So I think, I shared this on Instagram the other day, but the small yeses are like sinking into quiet time while I'm nursing, or taking a bath when I can, or drinking a really good glass of wine because it's amazing. And going to girls' night, because let's go to girls' night more, and things like that. So it's not always easy. It's not always perfect, and every day looks different.
Yeah, I think the conviction for me in this season, like Hunter Belis's Simple Joys, has been, where can I embed intentionally those simple joys? Because then, like you said, when you have nothing else, you feel stuck. Like, my simple joy is sitting on the couch with my son and watching Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol. We have probably watched that a million times.
Oh, yeah.
Excited.
Yeah. Yes. Don't you love this season of repetition? Man. Yes. That's like my son currently. We put on Red Panda, which is not, or like Turning Red.
Yeah.
Do you know, have you heard of this Disney movie? Not even like necessarily an age appropriate. Like, I think it's hilarious that my 2-year-old loves watching a movie about a coming of age adolescent female. But I really enjoy it. Like, I think it's a great film. And so now he will run through the house screaming, Red Panda, because he wants to watch it. Yes. And so I feel like I know every word to that movie. But at the same time, I know when I turn it on, I'm going to get snuggles. And I love the snuggles, right? So simple joy.
Definitely. Where do you think you have had to fight for this alongside your spouse?
Oh man, one of our biggest mottos for our marriage and parenting is we won't have them forever. And we try to remember that as one of the things that's really, really hard for us that we miss is getting to travel places. And so one of the things we've talked about, and every year it feels like we try to plan some trip and it gets canceled for some reason. And we talked about this last year. It got canceled because of pregnancy. And we were like, man, like, this is just not the time for this. And that has been the thing we fight for so much, is reminding ourselves someday our kids will be 18. Someday our kids will leave us. And then we will have how many years together to travel the world, to eat the crazy food, to do all of those things, to have sex whenever we want, to have conversation whenever we want. Like, we will have all the years to do that. But right now we have them. And that's like that is the greatest gift God will ever place into our hands. And so in our marriage, we fight for remembering that just because we're not checking these boxes of what these other couples are doing on Instagram, doesn't mean our marriage isn't amazing, because it is, but we're choosing to fight for something different. We're choosing to fight for our kids' childhood being this wonderful, amazing thing we want it to be.
I think that's been a constant reevaluation for even Joseph and I, because like we found out a couple months ago that like his training schedule for the Army is going to be an absolute crapshoot for the next 6 months.
Oh no.
So I think it's just supporting Ledger in the midst of, I think, transition and just like hard seasons developmentally for him. And you can probably speak more to this because like Ledger is now understanding that like Dada is not here. So trying to incorporate attachment in the midst of new developmental like milestones. Like as he learns that, okay, Daddy hasn't been here for 3 weeks and we can only talk to him on FaceTime, and then we might see him for one bedtime and then we don't know when we're going to see Daddy again. So maybe you can speak a little bit more toward what, outside of those 3 main areas, like you were saying, like what does healthy attachment look like in like real life, in the hard moments?
So I am spoiled. I will say I have probably the exact opposite kind of position of life related to my husband as you do, because my husband works from home. in a very flexible job that's very family friendly. And he's still on paternity leave right now for our son. He has 8 weeks of paid paternity leave.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we are very spoiled and very blessed. I never would have thought I would be in this position. With my first son, he went back to work after 2 weeks from birth, and that was with 4 days in the hospital. So, yay!
Feel that.
And 2 days in labor as well. So great fun. But so yeah, I remember him going back to work with Gray and thinking to myself, I think this might be the worst day of my life. I was, of course, experiencing postpartum depression at the time, having a really hard time with different things like pumping and feeding our child. But I remember him leaving and just being like, I'm alone. And now he's here with Gray all the time. And that's been a really special season. And so when we talk about attachment, when Matt and I talk about it, we get to talk about things like him wearing the baby while he does meetings and while he works and really cool things like that not every mom gets to enjoy her husband getting to do. I will say one of the things that's been really special for me, I was annoyed. I will say annoyed as the nice term by an Instagram reel I saw earlier this morning where a female influencer had shared this kind of, I guess, parody reel of fatherhood where a dad passes baby back after changing its diaper and is not helping the mom. Right. And I was very annoyed by this. And his excuse was, well, I worked 10 hours today. And I watched it and I felt infuriated. And I was like, why do I feel so upset? And I said to myself, my dad never did that. And so when I think back to like my frame of reference point for things like you experienced with Joseph, my dad worked crazy hours my entire childhood. But then I would sleep on him. Things like that would happen. Like he would always find ways to develop that attachment if he could. And so I think for husbands who have crazy schedules and for their wives, the intentionality just becomes all that more focused on physical touch and presence, right? Because how can you be close when you are close? And then when you're not, your child's not going to forget what that feels like. They're not going to forget those moments. Ledger's not going to forget what it meant to him that Joseph was there. So I think that those are so special and so important for us. Like we don't have to be as intentional because we get to see them all the time. But for the parents that do have to be intentional, just remember, like, you're still killing it. Like you're still doing an amazing job. You're still an amazing dad. This is like 2 roles that the Lord has given you, and you're just figuring out how to balance them. And that's okay. So just remembering those, like we are all called to a different place in parenting when it comes to that, and really just continuing to stay intentional when we're present.
Exactly. I think that's so wise and just such a good encouragement against the culture right now. Because we can definitely dive into that. I want to touch on that in terms of being boy moms,
Yep.
But I think you are doing a great job, period. And regardless of where you are in your parenting season, whether it's with, infants to teenagers, like the Lord's abundant grace is enough in each of those, even when it feels like what you are not doing is enough. I've had to remind myself of that. It's like in my brokenness, he is perfect, but more so because, the Lord is the ultimate father to my children. I would love to transition to gentle parenting. And I say that because I think I didn't even know what gentle parenting was until I was influenced through social media. Amen. So even as you said this morning, you saw that reel about, parenting and gender roles and what the household should look like. What are your thoughts or understanding of gentle parenting with your academic counseling mind frame?
Yeah, so gentle parenting, once again, is going to speak to those 3 things I talked about with attachment. So in my opinion, they go hand in hand, right? So gentle parenting is all about the way we're choosing to speak to our child. So it's about choosing to say no less as much as you can, choosing to have the conversation even when the conversation sucks. and you just want to say, because I said so. But instead, we're going to explain ourselves, and we're going to make it okay for our kids to ask questions instead of assuming that them asking questions means that they're doubting our authority or having less respect, right? Because that's kind of the way, I don't know about you, but that's kind of the way I was raised, right? If I'm asking the question, then that means I don't respect this authority. And that's not the way that I want my sons to perceive me. I don't know about you, but I'm not just this daunting authority that you just have to give blind respect to. Instead, we can talk about it. Like, we can talk about why we have to do this thing, even when we don't want to do it. From a 2-year-old changing his diaper to a 16-year-old not picking up that beer.
Right.
The more gentle we can be, the more conversational we can be, I believe, the more likely they're going to be to trust us in the long run. And that's all about that attachment. So, and then gentle parenting with babies and toddlers, man, flies in the face of a lot of popular thought right now in the United States specifically. The first thing that pops into my brain, Raina, every time, and I know you relate to this, is the 2 words that trigger me, which are sleep training. That is something that I remember how I started my gentle parenting journey was with my son. He was just struggling with sleep so much, and we were fighting and battling. It felt like constantly. And he was 4 months old, and we had read all of this about sleep training, and we're like, oh, this is great. Like, he'll sleep in a crib. Let's try it. We were clueless. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we were like, okay, we're going to try this thing. And I will never forget. I had just started counseling for postpartum depression at the time, and I'll never forget what it felt like to listen to him cry and to feel my heart break. But the societal pressure and the social pressure from my own close-knit group of people that I felt to get him to sleep on his own was so deeply rooted in me that I fought against my mom gut that said, pick him up. And I did that for months. We fought against that. And I still look back on it and it hurts my heart. And like, I grieve that season for me and for him. And now looking back, I'm like, man, I wish that I had just picked him up sooner, because we are now on our 2nd year of co-sleeping with him, and we love our life. We love it. So that's a big part of gentle parenting for us. And of course, physical proximity is always going to equate positive attachment. For the moms out there that like doubt whether or not their mom is telling them the right thing when they say, you need to put your baby down more. You don't have to listen to the people who say that. You don't have to.
Yeah. You're not going to spoil your baby.
There's no such, yes.
Yeah. There's no such thing.
There's no such thing as spoiling your baby. There's no such thing as holding them too much. There's no such thing as they like need to learn to soothe themselves. This is just such an interesting terminology that we picked up. From a counseling perspective, your child does not have the ability to soothe themselves.
Self-soothe, right.
There is no such thing as self-soothing. Your child actually learns to soothe based on how you regulate your own emotions. So that starts from something as beautiful as nursing, where they're literally soothing on your body, right? They're going to use the nipple to soothe themselves. And then it grows from now, our little toddlers are going to model the way we calm ourselves, the way we breathe even against their chest. Like, they're going to model all of that behavior. And so that is so important to understand. They soothe as you soothe. They regulate as you regulate. They speak as you speak. All of that is true. And so gentle parenting is just saying, I'm going to do this in a way that if my child's watching, hearing, feeling, touching, they feel kindness from me. They feel love from me. And they never have to question whether or not I'm there for them. And so it's building that really, really strong trust from a really young age, so that when they're older and you have to have a hard conversation like, what is a period, or what is sex, or any of those conversations that we're all so intimidated by, right? when
Right.
you have those conversations, suddenly your child's not blushing. They're not running to the corner and saying, no, mom, don't talk to me about that. Instead, it's like they're coming to you and they're asking you, what is sex? They're not going to their friend or going to so and so at church or at school. Instead, they're coming to mama because that's who's taught them.
And I think that's exactly right. It's that foundation of trust and security, and like they feel safe. I think that it's exactly what you mentioned with even co-sleeping, because while we've transitioned my son to his own room, we're sleeping with him, I would still say 75% of the time.
Yeah.
But we're also still nursing,
Yeah.
and I think that's been really hard because, like you said, it's undoing this common narrative that we see in I think just social media right now of like, well, your baby should be able to sleep through the night right now, or your baby should do this, or your baby should be blank.
Yep.
And I think protecting my own heart and parenting, that has looked most like being kind to myself. And if my son, knows what he needs, like, who am I to tell him? And exactly like you said, if I can't regulate myself as like a grown human through my own emotions, how can I expect my 21-month-old to keep it together and, quote unquote, behave when he doesn't get his drill or toy at Target this week?
Yeah. I think something cool, I didn't get to nurse my first son. And so nursing this time around, something that I've noticed is when I'm really dysregulated, nursing is really hard.
Oh, wow.
And so analyzing what does that mean for me, and what does that mean for my parenting? And it means like I'm not able to soothe if I'm not soothed. And so where am I finding my comfort? And is it in something that's going to flee from me, or is it in something that's eternal?
Right.
And so really resting in the Father. I have a friend who has a 3-year-old who's just really struggling with some tantrums and different things right now. And she still rocks him to sleep at night and is really, really passionate about that special time that they have together. But he's really been fighting that. And so something that she started doing is, as he's falling asleep, she puts a headphone in her ear and plays worship music. And she said it's helped her regulate so that he can stay regulated and fall asleep better. And so I think that's such a beautiful testimony of what the power of the Holy Spirit can be for us in those moments of parenting when we feel like we're falling apart. And just resting in the fact that we have this comforter, like we have him. And are we tapping into what he can really do for us? And when we do, how does parenting look different?
That's such beautiful, like tangible advice. In the midst of us being so connected to technology, I think it would change the way that we see motherhood in those hard moments if we were just more intentional about it. As simple as sticking in your AirPods when, you're walking to the park and your child is having a full meltdown.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a beautiful segue into discipline. I know that that's going to be a hot button topic just because there's going to be so many opinions.
Because that's so real.
But where do you think gentle parenting and attachment and all of that plays into discipline with the gospel mindset?
Yeah. So just as a preface to this, for the individuals that tune in and you have a child who's older than 2, I understand I'm just scratching the surface of this whole discipline thing, and that I don't know fully what it's like to experience a 4-year-old tantrum or a 16-year-old rebelling or anything like that. Yep. So I come at this humbly, but also very, very, very passionate about what I believe as far as discipline is concerned. The number one thing that we believe in attachment with discipline, apart from no spanking, which I'm just going to say is an implied belief with attachment and gentle parenting. But the number one thing that we believe is never removing yourself from your child, or never removing your child from yourself. And so something that was really popular in parenting these days and has been Lord since probably the 70s, is something we call timeout. And timeout for a lot of people looks like sending your child to their room, right? Like like, I don't know about you, but I can't count the number of times I heard go to your room as a kid, and as a teenager. And so the challenge for parents, instead of removing your child from yourself, is how does it look like to discipline them in a way where you are present? And so gentle parenting has something we call time in. And that means your child has to sit still and not be stimulated and not play with something and make eye contact for some period of time. And usually we set a timer with toddlers, right? So they can see the countdown and feel a little better about life. But
Right.
so yeah, so usually like there's a chair in your room, and it does not have to be like this is your timeout chair, right? Instead, it can be a normal place in your house. Say you're in the kitchen and your child does something that needs to be corrected, I'll say. Just go and sit down with them at the kitchen table. Talk about what happened, and then say, okay, we're going to sit here for 3 minutes, and we're not going to do anything except think about what just happened. Set the timer, let those 3 minutes run out, and say, okay, do you remember why we did this, right? This with toddlers, always pointing back to the cause. Do you remember why we did this? And have the conversation again, and then go back to playing. Another really important thing to remember is forgiveness and forgetfulness. And as a mama, we have to be forgetful of the things that our children do that seem hurtful to us, especially when they're toddlers, right? There's no intention to harm. There's no malice or manipulation involved. And so how do we have forgetfulness? The other day, Gray hit me with a vacuum, and I very much did not enjoy the experience and didn't react in the moment super well to the experience. And just having forgetfulness of that moment so that I can continue loving my child well. And so that's really, really important, I think, for all ages, right? If our child is a teenager and they do something or say something, especially with teenagers, say something that seems really harmful to us, like the famed phrase of your kids saying, I hate you. What does it look like to be forgetful of that? Because in their mind and in their heart, that wasn't with the intention of actual hate, but instead was just rebelling against something they didn't like. And so really, again, this is obviously case by case for each parent, but really looking into our hearts and saying, how do I forgive my child when they hurt me? Because they're a child. So that's really important to remember, so that our attachment isn't harmed by their actions, because it should be steady and stable and constant always for their sake. So, those are the big things I think with discipline that I've learned so far as a mama, is staying present in the room, not ever sending your child away, because we never want them to learn that I do wrong, that means I don't feel love. We never want that to be something they learn. So instead, learning, this is really, really hard thing to handle. Mama's going to help me handle it, but it's still going to be really, really hard. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to like the root. I'm probably going to botch this, but like the root of discipline is disciple and teaching. I think transitioning from a framework where discipline is punishment into discipline is a place for teaching, I think has really been a place that the Lord has allowed my heart to soften.
Absolutely.
The simple first step for us to get down on his eye level when we're talking to him has been, I think, the first tangible step for us, because I think that we've both, not so much for Joseph, but for me, like I've had to unlearn the aggressor perspective. So in the midst of trying to transition from a more punishment focused discipline to a loving and like teaching and admonishing discipline, my first step, it's not perfect, believe me, because we're really wrestling through that right now in the midst of like toddler boundaries. But it's been, okay, Raina, like the thing that you're going to focus on right now is when you need to talk to him, you're going to like kneel down and like get in his face, like not in a condescending way, but you literally are just going to look in his eyes. And that has been the one phrase that we have like tried to incorporate with him, because I've heard it with my siblings as they've interacted with him recently, is look at mama's eyes, mama's eyes. Yeah. And that's honestly been the only thing we've been able to hold on to, because like you said, I'm just scratching the surface of what discipline looks like, and it's completely different from how I grew up. And so I imagine there's so many other mamas and people that are listening to this thinking like, well, you don't understand where I am right now. And to that, I would just say like, the Lord is bigger than where I am. And I'm, this is a place for wisdom to be shared. So please reach out. Let us know what you think. But it's a learning process for all of us. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think when you're like transitioning to thinking about gospel-centered parenting, right? And one of the coolest things, I love that you said that about mama's eyes. Like that just like tugs at my heartstrings so strong, because in counseling, we learned that if you're not making eye contact, then your brain is literally not sending the same message than when you are making eye contact. So in a really rudimentary sense, the reason our newborns look to our eyes is because they instinctually love us and nothing else. They just love us. And so they're looking to those eyes, and they're looking for us to respond with that same message of love. And so for our toddlers, that's not that far removed from them, right? And so they're looking in your eyes, waiting to see your love, waiting for it and to receive that. And so this is just so true to the gospel, right? Like, why do we have to experience discipline apart from love? Why? Why would that ever be a story of who Jesus is? Like, that's not the story we get from him. His story is grace, right? And so grace is literally taking that place. And so how do we step in for our child and say, I'm going to be here with you in the hard, the way that Jesus is with me in the hard? And that's what we want them to learn from us. And so I think that's so special, that mama's eyes, that's so special to think about. And they're going to learn everything from that look.
That's been the one place we've started, because
I love that.
It's a lot of unlearning as a parent from everything that I've learned and I thought was okay. And I thought, well, it's that famous narrative right now of, well, I turned out fine, so it must have not been a big issue. Coming from adults that can't co-regulate and are in current trauma counseling.
Yes.
But maybe your response would be similar to what you just mentioned. But what encouragement would you give to families knowing the career path that you're going to be walking into in child and adolescent counseling?
Yeah, so my number one encouragement would be ask for help. I think so often we believe that we have to have it all right as parents. Like I'll never forget looking at my mother-in-law and being, I'm only 26 years old. I don't know what I'm doing. And just trying to figure it out, but genuinely needing help. And that's really, really hard, right? Even like with you and I feel like there's so many moments when I thought, I feel like Raina would really understand what I'm going through right now. But instead of picking up the phone, I just think that internally to myself, and I don't do anything with it. And there's so often hard for us to find community that listens and community that hears. And so I think that's most built by when we ask, we receive. And so, I think ask for help, whether that's a friend who understands where you're coming from because you agree on a lot of things, or that's a church leader who you want to understand what does discipleship look like for my kid. I pray that everyone listening has a church or can find a church where that's something that's a core tenet of their beliefs, discipling children. And so we have people we can ask for help there, or maybe that's professional help. There are counselors out there who would love nothing more than to help you parent your child better. They exist. And one of the things we say in counseling is if everybody had great parenting, we wouldn't need counselors. Remember, and this is one of those things where I'm like, no pressure, but also like accept the responsibility of being a mother. where remember that the trauma that happens to your child shapes them forever.
Right.
Who they are as children is who they are as adults. So don't forget that.
I think that's a beautiful encouragement. Ask for help. And that's so funny. I had that same conversation with a friend last night. She was like, why didn't you call me? And I was like, well, insert all the lies that said I didn't need to I didn't need to tell you about this, okay?
Yeah, amen. Yeah, if I tell you about this, that means I'm weak or I don't know what I'm doing, and that makes me a bad mom.
That lie. Yes.
Yes. How many times could we end a sentence with that? That would make me a bad mom. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No.
No, it means you're a mom that's willing to learn. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier, that your children are not like innately manipulative. I just wanted to like circle back to that real quick because I think it's an important
for sure
point to make with these, sinfulness conversation of, yes, we are all sinful, but I don't think your toddler is trying to, like your toddler is not trying to manipulate you. And I've had to remind myself of that in our own parenting walk right now, because Ledger is fully developing a personality, which is equally hilarious and equally frustrating. I heard myself say this the other day, and I had to like pause, because I don't want always behavior modification. We want heart change. And that's literally what we speak in ministry to students. But how is that not enough, quote, in motherhood?
Yep.
Because motherhood, period, is ministry.
Yeah. So, wow. So many things just popped into my brain. And the first one is an interaction I had with Gray and another child on the playground. And we had gone on a play date with a friend, and he was playing with this little girl who's about 2 years older than him. And so she's an older toddler and he's a younger toddler, and they're playing, and she all of a sudden gets frustrated, pushes him, and says, I just don't want to play with Gray right now. And her mom comes over to me and says, I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh, it's okay. I totally understand. And she's like, sinful nature, right? And I was just like, oh, that's true. Right. That is sinful nature, right? I know her family. She was not taught that behavior. That's something that just came out. So in the moment for her, like, behavior modification is step one, right? We don't do that because here's the cause and effect, because it hurts someone else. Heart change is the same thing, essentially. It hurts someone else. So how instead can we be kind? And so you're just connecting the two, I feel like, with a toddler. So much of what you would have to do is behavior modification, right? You cannot grab a knife, Gray. Yes. No, like we can't do that.
Running with the scissors that you just snuck up and grabbed off the counter. My love, we can't do those.
Yes. Also, just to preface, you are not a bad mom if one day your child finds scissors or knives. I just want to tell everyone that. I had this conversation with someone the other day. It's going to happen. Your toddler is going to discover something dangerous, and you're going to be like, how could I have possibly left that where he could have reached it? What is wrong with me? Nope, you're not a bad mom. They're just toddlers. Move on.
Man, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so I feel like behavior modification is, no, you can't do that because that's going to hurt you, or that could hurt someone else. Heart change is, why do we want to play with that? What is it about that seems fun to you? And how can we find that somewhere else? So just redirecting a lot. I mean, you know this. Toddler parenting is like 99% redirection.
Or choices.
So much of the time. Or choices, yes.
2 things.
Yes.
That's been the one other thing I would say is, in the midst of saying no, how can I kind of say yes?
Yeah.
So can I give you 2 moderate options?
Yeah, my pediatrician said this the other day. Never ask a question to which no or yes is not an acceptable option. So always ask a question that it's okay if they choose that, right? So don't say, are you ready for bedtime? When you actually mean it's time for bedtime.
Right. we're still gonna not play.
Yes. So that's really, really hard. You can say things like, depending on the family, some families are really strict routine people, but do you want to take a bath? And if no is an acceptable option, they can have 5 more minutes of playtime.
Right.
Right. But if no is not an acceptable option, don't ask the question because they will say no.
That is our favorite word right now. My sister, I hope when she listens to this, laughs because it's not actually funny right now. But
yes, I know.
No is we've just learned no, and now no is everything. So it's like trying to navigate no in the midst of safety, but also like boundaries.
Yeah. I think like evaluating for yourself, am I giving them enough things to say yes to? Like, I think there are days when I find myself distracted in parenting and I'm thinking about something else, and it becomes easier to just do the easy thing.
Right.
And not the hard thing, which is like providing activities for my child, choosing to go to the park, choosing to do all those things. I saw a funny meme the other day, and you might have seen it too. I feel like it's circulating around a lot, where it's like your child asks, or you ask your child to do something and you expect them to do it right away. They ask you to go to the park and you're like, oh, no, it's like 5 degrees colder than I want it to be. Do you know what I mean? And like you see that and you're like, man, we ask so much of such little minds. We ask so much of them. And so how can we ask just a little less of them, you know?
I think creating the space for them to be kids.
Yeah. Something my sister said yesterday, she's also very passionate about attachment and gentle parenting. Something she said yesterday, because we're both struggling with kids who would pitch a tent and live outside if they could. So they're very angry to be inside all week. And so one of the things she said yesterday was, have you thought about just letting him make a mess? And I was like, you know what? No, I hadn't thought about that. And she was like, find something messy for him to do and let him be stimulated in that fashion where it's like you're not saying no to something kind of wild. Because that's what outside is, right? Outside is I get to be free. I get to do what I want with very little restriction, depending on your neighborhood and your yard space. But I think that is so crucial, is finding spaces for them to be messy and have freedom, right? The Lord gives us lots of room to be messy and have freedom. And it doesn't, it doesn't always work out well for us, but when we're listening to him, it does. And so let our child learn to be messy and have freedom while still listening.
And that's where the foundation of a healthy attachment comes in, because in the case that something doesn't go right, like I do want my son to know that, hey, like, you went off the slide in a way that I told you was probably not the wisest way to do that. Your dismount was not graceful. You know, I still want me to be the safest place. And as he gets older, I think you said it at the very beginning, like translating the fact that like, as I model Jesus to him, he will actually be able to have the capacity that Jesus is the ultimate safe place.
Yeah. How do we expect our children to ever follow Christ if we don't look like Christ? Like, how in the world, why would they ever choose a father that is heavenly? Like, why would they ever choose him if they're not modeled his love? Like, that's the greatest testimony we can give in our lives, is to raise our children with the loving and kindness of the Father. Like, that is it. Like the beginning and end for parents. Like I just pray someday. I was checking out at Whole Foods on Sunday, and there's this older gentleman, and I always try to go to his checkout line because he'll like give Gray high fives and interact. And I was wearing Shepherd, and we were checking out, and he was talking to me about having boys, and he was so sweet and kind, but he said something that really struck me. And he's like, I never felt close to my mom. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. And I said, I pray my sons never say that. And he goes, the kids are like, boys are always closer to their dads. And he just said it very flippantly. And I was just like so struck
Oh,
by
my
it in
heart
my
breaks
heart.
right now.
I know my heart breaks thinking about that. But I can't, driving home, I looked at my husband, a very healthy childhood, very wonderful parents. And I said, like, do you feel like you could talk to your mom about anything? And he said, yeah, anything.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk to her about anything. But I know in my head that he calls his dad, right? When something's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And so I'm still evaluating this, it happened 2 days ago, and I'm still evaluating this, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what does it look like to have an adult child someday who picks up the phone and calls me when he wants to talk about anything,
About, anything, right?
right? Like, I just want to be friends with them. Like, I never want that to end. And so I really think that looks like healthy attachment now. I really do. I think it's so important. And there are moms out there who can speak to this. One of them that's coming to my mind, that if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should is Shalene Roberts, who can speak to what it looks like to have a teenage boy and still be modeling that attachment for him. But I pray that, like, I have teenage boys who want to talk to me about their girlfriends. I don't know if you think about that, but I think about that, of like,
All the time.
yes,
Yep.
yes. Like, man, if I could have talked to my dad about boys, how helpful would that have been to my life?
Yeah.
So there's lots of, we could get into so much with
I
teenagers
know.
on that we won't touch on right now, but maybe 10 years from now we'll have this conversation again and see how it goes.
Right?
Yes.
But I think it's also like good to know that, because Joseph and I have had that conversation, because I wasn't raised in a home that knew the Lord, and I like found him much later. And so, like, as I've seen God redeem my home as an adult, Joseph and I have had the conversation of, I've like asked him very candidly, like, is it better to not do Jesus in the way that, like, I think is the, like, quote, right way, so that he can find Jesus later as I did? Because I wouldn't say that, like, my faith is any better or different than Joseph's, and when he was in a very securely, like, biblical home. But that's just been something, a little off topic, but that's something I wrestled with, is it's ultimately all parenting comes down to this balance. And with a gospel perspective in mind, regardless of how you navigate gentle parenting, attachment, your own healing journey, because I think that plays, like you said, a major role in how much capacity you have to love and serve your babies. The Lord is sovereign over all of that.
Yeah, I think, because I have to respond to what you said, because it struck me a little bit about the way you came to the gospel versus the way Joseph did. And I think what I would have to say to that is, how would it change your relationship with your mother or father if you could say that they were the ones that led you to Christ?
Right.
I think that's where the difference comes. Like, maybe your faith isn't any stronger or weaker than Joseph's. Maybe your parenting isn't stronger or weaker than Joseph's, but maybe your relationship with them could have been different if that had been a part of your journey as a child.
That's such a crazy point, because my dad has become a believer literally a year and like some, like his spiritual birthday is like a year and some change now. And we got like to celebrate that this year.
Praise God.
That's a whole other story you and I have to talk about, because I don't know if I updated you with that. But that's just such an interesting point that you make, because now as an adult, I've literally in the past year walked with my dad as the Lord has like redeemed his story completely. And not that I do miss that he was that spiritual leader as a child, but now I'm seeing God do that as an adult in my like daddy-daughter relationship, but also like as I have like been able to walk and disciple and encourage him.
That's so cool.
From a completely different just like perspective. So that's been really sweet. But all that to say, it's not too late.
Yeah.
I think that the Lord can redeem whatever circumstance you're walking into. And it took, almost 8 to 10 years of prayer over my dad to now he literally hands out Bibles he ordered a box of Bibles and like hands them out to people on the street. Like,
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's been really cool to see that. But at the end of the day, my encouragement to add on to everything that you said is like, the Lord is sovereign. The Lord is the ultimate father. You're not a mistake in your parenthood journey.
So precious.
He's going to give you everything that you need, but you have to be in a place to receive
Yep.
it. And that may mean going to counseling. As we wrap up, I have some final questions for you. If you'd like to share like where a community can connect with you, follow along with your story as a mama, I can share those in our show notes if you want to share anything about that.
So for now, my mama journey is pretty private.
Yeah.
And we'll keep it that way. In the future, as I become a counselor and build whatever that platform looks like, I pray that the Lord gives me voice for that. In this season, I am in a newborn bubble that I love and sticking it out.
Love that.
You know what I mean?
Totally. And I respect and honor that. And I'm so excited for your journey into motherhood and counseling. Because even as I was processing this episode, I was like, what a better picture of motherhood and healing and wellness that like you don't have to be like done, or like we don't have to be done in the midst of this. So like good, I would love to hear what you learn in the midst of your learning.
Oh gosh. What don't I learn?
Right?
Yeah. So for just a little bit of background, for those that don't know a lot about my story, when I had my first son, his birth was traumatic for me. May not have been traumatic for another one, but was traumatic for me, and triggered a lot of things, including postpartum depression. And so that journey started my journey of motherhood. And so to start motherhood in a place of depression, and there's so many out there who did the same thing, is extremely hard and confusing, and because you don't feel joyful when people are telling you to feel joyful. And as I started going to counseling and started learning what was causing so many of my feelings, one of the biggest things I learned, and I'm still learning, and I pray every mom learns, is that who you are as a person, as an individual, is who you are as a mom. That is not compartmentalized. You are not separate people wearing two different hats. Like, this is my Grace hat when Grace gets to be without her kids. And then this is my hat I put on when I'm a mom. You should be the same person in both of those arenas. So that brings up two questions. One, are you living the way you want to live for your kids when you're not with them? And two, when you're with your kids, are you showing them who you are? Are you showing them your personality? Are you showing them your creativeness? You talked about your giftedness in speaking. Is that coming out as a mom? Like, all of these different things are our giftedness in discipleship. Is that coming out as a mom? And so I think that is the biggest thing I've learned and am still learning and trying to do well as I'm learning. I love the way you said that. What are you learning as you're learning? That's what I'm learning. How to be myself and be a mom.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. And maybe in our final question, this might be a little bit different or might be the same, but it's for our final question that we ask all of our guests. If you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or a community that is listening, what would you share?
Forgive yourself. Just forgive yourself. To my younger self, I would say it's okay that you had all of these hard expectations on yourself, but it's time to move on. And I think that that's so true for so many of us in the start of marriage, in the start of motherhood, in the start of college, in the start of all of these big seasons where we have all these expectations of what this is going to mean for our lives and how transformative this is going to be. It is, but you're not going to figure that out until 3 years from now, Grace. You're not going to figure that out until 7 years from now, or whatever it looks like. There's some things I still don't have figured out that I pray when I'm 80, I can look back on and go, oh yeah, that's why God did that. But maybe I won't ever. So forgive yourself
and give yourself the space to have the Lord forgive you, because forgiveness is a whole other thing in motherhood, you know, like you're not a bad mom.
Amen. Which is kind of the same thing when you think about it.
If we could just end on that.
Amen.
You're not a bad mom.
You're not a bad mom. If anyone listens, to this and learns anything, you're not a bad mom.
Wow, Grace, this has been so fun and such a sweet conversation. I've loved this.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your newborn and your life with us. And I will link all of the fun things in the show notes, and we will see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.
This episode of If Only I Were Wiser has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more episodes so you don't miss any encouragement. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to build our community and share more about topics that will be healing and helpful for you. See you in the next episode.